Hello there. Today I'm going to be taking you through my top 10 countries. This is part 1, so it's numbers 10 to 6. I've been to 50 countries so far, so it was quite hard narrowing this down, although honestly, this one was harder than the top 5. Most of the countries on this list were places that I visited before I started doing video, so a lot of it will be static images, I'm afraid. Also bear in mind that some of these places I went to before smartphones were a thing, so be prepared for some less than stellar quality images, like when 2 megapixels was the peak of digital cameras, and some from some disposable cameras even. The more recent the trip, the better quality the pictures and the less of my mug you'll have to see. I'll try not to delve too deep into each country, otherwise we'd be here all day, but I will give you an overview of what I did, what I saw, food, that kind of thing. Anyway, enough waffling, let's get into the top 10. Number 10, Germany. I first visited Germany in 1998, going to Cologne on a school trip, which kind of gives you a rough idea of how old I am. One of my main memories from that trip was Eltz Castle. Here's what it looks like when not photographed by a teenager with a disposable camera. I really fell in love with Germany when I was an adult, mostly due to their beer and sausages. A stein of Pilsner with a bratwurst or currywurst is just mwah. Not forgetting the classic Bavarian architecture and traditional dress. I know that doesn't encompass the entire country, but when I think of Germany, that's the style I think of. As well as Cologne, I've been to Munich, Berlin, Hamburg, and Dresden. Out of those cities, Munich and Berlin are my favourites, but I can't split those two. I thought the Hofbrauhaus in Munich was awesome, a bit gimmicky or touristy, but that's not always a bad thing. I was in Munich with an old mate of mine and we did a tour of the Allianz where Bayern play, and we also got to see them train. This was when Robben and Ribéry were still there, so a pretty peak Bayern side. In Berlin, naturally I saw remnants of the wall, while the Olympic Stadium was very impressive, not just in how it looked, but also considering the history that it has. What does separate Berlin from Munich was the nightlife. Both great cities for a night out, but for me, Berlin has the edge. Food highlights. Food highlights for Germany, I've basically already touched on that. Bratwurst, currywurst, bockwurst, any kind of German sausage, and their beer, specifically Pilsner. I love that stuff. Number 9, Croatia. I first went to Croatia in 2009 to Zagreb, but it's my trip there last year that earns it a place on this list. I did a road trip that also took in a bit of Montenegro and Bosnia, but I wasn't in either of those countries long enough for them to challenge the top 10. Dubrovnik was the highlight for me, especially Lokrum Island. Obviously, the old town has the big Game of Thrones connection, but it's a beautiful city regardless. The walk around the old town walls was certainly a mission. It was a boiling hot day, but so worth it. The views across the city were incredible. I went in mid-September, good for avoiding high prices during the British school holidays, but I was told by my apartment host that it was still peak season in general. If you want a similar vibe along with being by the sea but not as busy, then there's Split and Zadar, the latter being the quietest of the two.
Food highlights.
Food-wise, if you love seafood, then you'll be happy, and there's a lot of Italian influence from across the Adriatic Sea. Food highlights from Croatia were the cevapi I had in Split, recommended by my host there. The best way I can describe it is like mini koftas in a flatbread with onions and ajvar. And for those currently screaming at their screens saying, but cevapi's originally from Bosnia, don't worry, I had some there as well. Another host recommendation, this time in Dubrovnik, was this octopus burger, which was a much softer consistency than your average patty, but that didn't stop it from packing in great flavour. Last up is pasticada, braised beef with gnocchi. The one I had was a bit overcooked, but I could tell that done better it would be amazing. In terms of nature, there are places like Plivice and Krka National Parks, which sadly I didn't get time to see when I was in Croatia. But that's a great reason to go back. Number 8. Turkey. Turkey, technically, is the only country that makes this list where I've only visited one city. It won't surprise you to learn that that one city was Istanbul. I spent 3 days here in 2019 exploring the mosques, of which there are many, marvelling at the architecture and just how old some of them are, like the Hagia Sophia. As well as that, there were typical sites like the Grand Bazaar with its herbs and spices amongst other things. I picked up some Turkish delight to take home, not like that fries rubbish you get here, proper stuff. I do love a good market, and this was no exception, even if the selection did start to get a bit samey after a while. A trip along the Bosphorus offered some much needed time off my feet to relax and just take everything in.
Food highlights.
Food highlights from Turkey were pretty much everything. The first thing I had was this, a beiti kebab, like if someone made sausage rolls but from kebab ingredients. This is kunefe, my favourite Turkish dessert. Melted cheese covered in angel hair-like pastry called tel kadayif, soaked in syrup and topped with crushed pistachios. When I first heard about kunefe, it didn't sound like it would work, but then I tried it and it was incredible. Now if I ever go to a Turkish restaurant and they have it on the menu, that is dessert sorted. I know there's so much more to see in Turkey and I do intend to head back one day. Quick little insert here. So for the last few countries in this video, I only had images from disposable cameras, so personal images, and they just weren't usable. So for the rest of this video, it's just going to be stock images, I'm afraid. Number 7, New Zealand. It's been 20 years since I went to New Zealand. Wow. I have family in the Christchurch area, so we went to see them on a family holiday. Christchurch was the base, but we also visited Hammer Springs and Queenstown, the latter sticking in my mind most for the views across the mountains and lake. There's only one other place I've seen water that was as crystal clear as in New Zealand, although if I named the place, that would be a spoiler for the next video. If judging solely on natural beauty alone, then New Zealand's probably in my top 2 or 3. We caught a rugby game, watching the Canterbury Crusaders beat the Brumbies, which is the only rugby game I've ever been to, but I remember it being quite the spectacle.
Food highlights.
In terms of food highlights from New Zealand, I've not really got any. Honestly, I don't remember anything specific. Just the beer. I was under 18 at the time, but my dad could buy me booze if I wanted to, so good times. Number 6, Hong Kong. Right, I'm not going to get into the politics of what Hong Kong is or isn't here. Whether you count it as being part of China or not, either way it counts as me having visited a country. I've been to Hong Kong 3 times, 2 of those times in 1999. Twice in the same year might seem odd, but the reason was that my dad was working there and his company paid for us to go out there to see him. The third time was a few days on the way back from New Zealand to break up the journey. The only other country I've been to in Asia is Singapore, which was on the way out to New Zealand, so I don't have much to compare Hong Kong to, but to me, especially in my teens, it was like another world. The skyscrapers towering over you, taking in the skyline from the main side of Kowloon at night with all the lights on, looking down over the city from Victoria Peak, the Big Buddha on Lantau Island, Stanley Market for those sweet fake goods. So much to reminisce over.
Food highlights.
The main food highlight was going to a dim sum restaurant. Some of my dad's colleagues took us, and I didn't know what most of it was, but I still tried it. They'd wheeled trolleys around the room filled with those bamboo steamers, each one containing something different. What I know I had was baby octopus tentacles, which tasted like chewy chicken, a cube of fried milk, and lastly, something I only recently figured out what it was, custard buns. I saw these on a menu in London's Chinatown in the last couple of years, and it clicked. That's what I had in that dim sum place in Hong Kong. I sent this picture to the family WhatsApp chat, and it turned out I was the only one who remembered them. I'd love to go back to Hong Kong, but there's so much I'd really want to see in mainland China that I have to prioritise doing that first. So, that's the first half of my top 10 list. I'd love to know if you've been to any of these places too. If you have, leave a comment below letting me know what you did or didn't like about them. Have a good one, and I'll see you next time for the top 5.